Hey guys, thank you for joining us today. As always, I'm Darren Sides.
You're always Darren Sides.
I am always. I'm trying to think of something witty, but I can't think of anything. So I'm Darren, and this is Gary. I'm in the nice collared shirt today. Gary's in the t-shirt, so we switch roles on that.
My wife even said something as I walked out the door. She's like, "Are you wearing that?" I'm like, "Come on now. I mean, haven't we just all gotten over the dressing up part?"
Yeah, this is Sunday night talkback. So this is time to let loose and let down our hair.
Time to relax.
It works like that. So,
guys, hey, are you wearing pants?
I am wearing pants.
Okay.
I am, and I'm wearing khakis now, man.
What?
I know, man. I'm
dressed. What happened to you?
Dressed up, but I'm wearing my my slippers, aka whatever he's called, Vans. So thank you, mother-in-law, for buying me Vans because they are wonderful. But she's not even watching right now, so there you go. Brownie points that are not going to get used.
Yeah, you don't even get credit for that.
So as you can tell, we're on a downward spiral right now.
Do something. You're still
we're going to talk about our little things that the first two sermons. So we had the leaven and we had the stick today. I had to think because it was Wednesday was the first time I heard our Moses and the stick sermon. So I was like, wait, that was this week. So Moses with the walking sticks, those are our two little thing sermons. And if you have any questions on the little things, feel free to drop it in the comment on Facebook and we will talk about it. But here with Moses, and I'll just say my thing that kind of struck me was you kind of talked about how Moses was thinking about being raised with the scepter in his hand, and that was maybe that's a little bit of inference, but I never really thought about Moses in that way. And then the second part on this stick was when you started talking about how God just used whatever was in his hand, and then I've never read how it was Moses's kind of walking stick, and then it's the staff of God there at the end of what was it, Exodus 4? Was that where it was? Mm-hmm. And so just that idea that it all of a sudden became God's staff and attributing it to God was really cool. So those were the things that I really took away from me, or for me. What were kind of things that just stuck out in your head?
Well, I love this story. It's one of my favorite Bible stories, and so I've preached on it several times in several different contexts. But this idea of how we sort of take our biblical heroes and really sanitize them and really don't talk about their flaws enough. And the Bible is so intentional about telling us about their flaws and their shortcomings and describing them that I think it's an important part of the story because it's a reminder that they're normal. These are normal people like us, and God uses, in fact, delights in using the normal, flawed, weak people because I think he gets the glory that way. So Moses is a really great example of that. And of course, we didn't even really talk much about his age. I mean, he was up there when God called him, just like Abraham was up there. So whether it's not we're using our lack of education, our lack of experience, our failures and brokenness, or our age, you almost look at Moses and all those excuses are tossed out the window, because if God's calling you, he's also going to be the one to equip you to do what he's called you to do. So it's a great story, and I'd encourage everybody, if you haven't read it in a while, just go back and read. I mean, really just read Exodus 1 through 4, or read all 4 chapters, but really 3 and 4 specifically about the calling of Moses, but 1 and 2 set it up really well.
Yeah, Edward made a comment about when it was mentioned about Moses' failure, he just had failing situations, but Moses was never a failure. I think it's an interesting idea. I mean, it really depends on how you define a failure,
right,
as a person.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess that's a good discussion. I'm glad Edward brought it up, because I think when he went and killed the Egyptian slave master, I think that there could be an argument that was a failure on his part. That he was trying to do God's will, but he wanted to do it his way. Mm-hmm. And his way was by, inciting violence against the slave master, when God had a different plan all along. And, we always play the what if game, and God's, plan, it's perfect the way it was. But what if Moses had decided to be obedient to God from within the system? I mean, who knows? And of course, there are tons of parallels with what's going on today too. About Moses's first attempt was one of violence and trying to end violence and oppression through his own form of violence and oppression, and instead of just walking into Pharaoh and saying, "Hey, let these people go," which seems like an absurd plan, but that was exactly God's plan.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's that idea. One of my favorite papers I ever wrote in high school, and I'll credit Miss Chambliss for kind of opening up not just literature with me, but just this idea of peaceful protest, peaceful revolution was, it's just a really open thing on just research peaceful protests, and this idea that it's really is what changes people because they don't have an argument against you. When you look at Moses' life, I mean, he tried to take it into his own hands, and immediately the people that he wanted to follow him just couldn't. And I think that's where you look at people and they would consider, as Edward points out, an 80-year-old out in the desert, I would classify that almost as like a missed opportunity or a failed life, but we don't look at him as a failure because we saw the rest of the story. And I think that's just something there. And the truth of the Bible is that at some point, if we classify ourselves as sinners, not just people with sin, but truly sinners, which is the way I think the Bible describes us, there's a point where we need to accept that we are flawed and that on our own we are failed, and that we need Jesus, we need God to ultimately restore us. And so I don't know, Edward, it's a great conversation, it's a great idea, just knowing, just thinking about that.
Well, in fact, to know that God uses our sin and uses our failures, and actually those are the things that become tools that he uses in us to bring about change and to join him in his redemptive activity in the world. I mean, it's like the person who struggled with addiction who is now working in the recovery movement, counseling people, or the person who's been through divorce who is now counseling and working with people who are facing, who are trying to recover from divorce. That God is glorified in our failures if we're willing to surrender them to him, if we're willing to take, the walking stick that we were dreaming would be a scepter and still give it to the Lord, then he can use that. That's good enough. But I think part of the problem is if we don't acknowledge our failures, if we won't even acknowledge them, we certainly aren't going to allow God to use them. So I think it begins with us sort of saying, I have, not just made mistakes, I've sinned. Because there's a difference. A mistake is something you do on a math test. A sin is something you do on purpose. And I think that when we acknowledge that, but then the next step is, now will I surrender it? Because it's one thing for me to admit it to God and to sort of repent of that and sort of put that in my past, and I want to forget about it. But then am I willing to actually go back? For Moses to go back to Egypt was, he was confronting his sin and failure and brokenness and disappointment. He was going at it head on, and the question for many of us is, will I do that with my sin and brokenness? Will I, surrender that to God and say, here it is, Lord, this is yours now, take it and use me however you will.
Yeah, it's just a picture of God's grace. I know that was one thing that with the leaders in small groups on Friday that I talked about, because the small group curriculum was actually on Gideon.
Right.
And so often we highlight Gideon as kind of this hero, and we highlight honestly the negative parts of Gideon's story, like the fleece, and we're like, this is what we should model. It's like, no, that's descriptive, that's not prescriptive, that's not something that we should do, but it is something that's positive for us because it's a statement of how God's grace continues and helps us even through our failures. And so God's grace is there even in the case of Moses.
Yeah, that's a great, your comment about Gideon. I left that out of the small group lesson, by the way, the fleece, on purpose, because I drew. But that statement you just made would make a great podcast one day too, about how we confuse, how important it is when you read the Bible to know the difference between descriptive and prescriptive, because how many times we take descriptive passages and make them prescriptive. That's a great example of one of those where, putting the fleece out becomes something that we all think is biblically mandated or at least permitted because Gideon did it. So that's a great example.
Yeah. And even that idea too of descriptive and prescriptive, you kind of opened my eyes when we did Psalms. I guess that was last summer when we did the Psalms, and we covered a Psalm, and you questioned whether the Psalm, which oftentimes I will read as descriptive, is really, or prescriptive is really descriptive. Like David's heart there, it's describing what his heart was and what he was going through in the middle of the story. It's not necessarily prescribing how we should be praying to God or the feelings we should necessarily have. And so just having that freedom, I don't feel like that's fallacy. I don't feel like that's, being too liberal with the Bible. In fact, I think it may be reading more of what the author intended and allowing you to think through what did the author actually intend.
Right.
So,
yeah, and I think that comes back, that's connected back to the whole idea about what we do. One of the big ideas in this series is to help people see that all these great men and women of faith, and all these great stories of faith that we celebrate in the Bible really all began with flawed, ordinary people doing little acts of obedience, and just because I think part of it is in the church, when we make saints and we make, marble statues of them and put gold halos on them, then somehow that gives us the excuse for why we don't have to behave that way. We don't have, God wouldn't expect us to be like Moses, or he wouldn't expect us to be like John or Peter or Paul, when in fact they were every bit as normal and flawed as we are. And so one of the things in this series is helping people connect the little acts of obedience that God may use and grow bigger things for his kingdom. So, Moses sees the bush. Like, I didn't want to rush past that this morning. He saw the bush, he walked to the bush, and the Bible clearly says, and then when God saw that Moses responded, then he told him what he had to tell him. And it just hit me really powerfully as I was reading that for the who knows how many time in my life. I've read it, many, many times. I said it's one of my favorite passages. And I'm like, wait. And then God said, I'm just thinking, how many burning bushes, figuratively, how many burning bushes do I walk by on a daily basis? And how many times were those little nudges of the Spirit a gateway to some incredible movement that God wanted to do if I had just been faithful and obedient in the small thing? And so I think it's really important for all of us. And this really draws us back to the pause series a little bit. Are we communing with the Spirit on a moment by moment, day by day basis? Are we living in tune with the Spirit? Pausing, willing to push the pause button on our life to say, wait, there's a burning bush. And everything in you is like, yeah, but you've got an appointment in 10 minutes. Nope. God, if God really has control of my life, God takes priority, and it may mean I'm late, but I'm responding to the burning bush. Now, knowing that it's God is really key. Otherwise it just becomes an excuse to run on every tangent that comes your way. And so I think that's a different conversation. But I think the point today is, sometimes we know as the Spirit is nudging us, and if you walk with Christ for a period of time, you get to know the nudging of the Spirit. And how many times do we not respond, and what would have happened if we had responded? I think that's really the lesson that I took away in my own reading of that passage.
Yeah, I think the importance is just learning how, and sometimes you learn after the fact what the Spirit sounds like or feels like, or how he has conversation with you. Like, even as you're talking about how we sanctify and almost overly saint the kind of the heroes of the Bible, like all of this conversation made me think of Romans, when Paul's talking about how grace abounds kind of in our sins, and it's not a license for us to sin, and that's where he goes in that whole heavens no, but this is describing what I think Paul is getting at there. And what I think Paul experienced in his own life is that even in his greatest sins, even in his greatest failures, even when Paul honestly probably after Christ saw him as a failure, and sometimes while we're in it, Paul's an example of how those were the things he would boast about, what he later thinks is a failure, that God uses all those times. And that's how you see God's grace. And honestly, I think that's how you learn what the Spirit sounds like in your own life, is when you're like, man, I missed that opportunity and I could have done something there.
Yeah.
But well, we're not going to belabor this, guys. If you have any thoughts, we're going to cast some vision towards what's coming up, just because we haven't done that fully. But if you had any other thoughts, feel free to kind of put them down. Gary, any thoughts about kind of going forward before we get into specifics about what's coming up?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll continue our Little Things series, but I want to make sure that we're also promoting the Little Things Challenge. I'm super excited about what folks have done. I'm going to share the church website with everybody, just because I think it's important for us to just remind everybody how we're trying to make this really practical too. So if you go to our website, this is our awesome new website that we have now, ssbc.org, and you'll see right here, it says Little Things help us meet our goal, and our goal is going to have to go up because our folks are doing such an awesome job. So if you click on that Little Things, it will take you to the Little Things Challenge page, and you can see here is our goal of 3,000 little things. Actually, we're basing the goal on every diagnosed case of COVID-19 in Northeast Florida, which unfortunately that number is going up. But our folks are responding, and so we may raise the goal and include a few more counties, because I think right now we're only including 5 Northeast Florida counties, so we may expand it. But then over here, you see how many little things have been done. And the only way we know they've been done is because people register on this page. So that's why I'm pointing this out. So there are 1,582 little things right now that have been done, and you can read more about it. This is what you do. Here's the form where you fill it out, and you can just tell us what you do. You don't have to put your name. But if you would like to put your name, we would love to be able to keep track of, how many different folks are engaged, but we also know that, it's a private thing and we don't want to call anybody out, and we certainly wouldn't use the information. But if we've got a question, it helps us to know, hey, we'd like to know more about that ministry or that thing you did. How many people were affected? And then there's a list of things that we're suggesting that are here. And you can tell us the description and hit submit, and that's how we get our number. Now, if you look at the bottom, here is where we actually make the recommendations, and you can see it matches the list up here of the little things. But down here, you can see L, love someone who has lost income by helping them with groceries, gas, or some essential living expense. I mean, that's a big deal right now. I, invest in one more child. And I just want to do a shout out to our partners at the Florida Baptist Children's Home, who are really helping a lot of families right now during some very difficult times. Through Invested, we have committed to give them $7,000. So we would love to raise that extra $7,000 by folks giving to the Invested campaign. So you can just give what you can afford to Invested. If you want more information on One More Child, you can click the link right here that says One More Child, and you can learn more about their ministry. T, thank a medical worker, first responder, or essential worker by making and distributing a hero appreciation bag. If you click this link, it will take you to how to make a hero appreciation bag. So everything you need is right there. The second T, tell someone staying safe at home that you care and are available to help by making a call or sending a card or letter. Now, I want to really focus on this one for just a minute, because we have so many of our senior adults who are staying safe at home. And those of us who did that for a while know how isolating it felt. And I had people in the house with me. I could not imagine if I were, a widow or a widower, or if it was just me and Sherry at home and our kids, we couldn't be with our kids. Listen, right here, if you email Cindy and say, hey, I'd love to just send a card or make a phone call, we can share that information with you, and you can do that. That's a little thing, but believe me, it is not a little thing. So I just want to give a shout out right there for everybody to consider doing that. L, leave a note for your mailman, delivery person, trash connector, etc., thanking them for staying on the job during the crisis. That's a big deal. I heard a story about somebody doing something for their garbage men. It was such a cool thing they did, and they put something on top of their trash can with a note on it, and they said that those guys were so appreciative. It's so easy to forget some of those people who do those essential services and just say thanks. Eat at or take out from a local restaurant, support community merchants. That is a really big deal. We're a part of the Merchants Association here in San Marco, and these small businesses, every single purchase makes such a big difference, and it allows them to keep employees. As the PPP funds run out at the end of June, it's important that they're making money in order to keep their employees employed. The T, take groceries or supplies to a person staying safe at home. That's a really big deal. Again, you can email Cindy if you want to know if there's somebody specific you can help. H, help us serve our congregation during on-campus worship gatherings by serving as a greeter or volunteer with our preschooler children during our on-campus worship gatherings. And you can email Vicki@ssbc.org to learn more. We've had about 100 people, I think, on campus, 100 in the worship service, and then some kids. And we're doing our best to make sure it's a safe and clean environment, but obviously, we need help to do that and just host people. I invite someone to watch our service online by sharing a link with them or to join you on campus worship. Now, this is so easy. If you do not share our service online, you can right now just copy the YouTube link and share it on Facebook, or share the Facebook event from this morning from the worship service. And then just, that's just a little thing. But even if you sent it to someone as you're listening to it, maybe the Holy Spirit nudges you to say, hey, this person could really use that encouraging word today. Share it with them specifically. That is just a simple thing. Need an idea? There is a great website that Cindy discovered called mentalhealth.org. And it is a great list of little things that you can do. Give a neighbor a loaf of friendship bread. Donna Gardner brought homemade friendship bread this morning, and I happen to know she has got tons of starter. So if you need some starter, let us know. We'll get it to you. That friendship bread is spreading like a virus of love across our city. Am I allowed to say that?
I think you can.
I think I just did.
I don't know what we can say anymore, or what we can't say. So.
I don't really know either, but I know my wife doesn't look like she's watching, so I'll get away with it. Or my kids, they would give me a really hard time if they heard me say that. Anyway, S, something not on the list. So basically you can make it up yourself. Now, I took the time to go through all that because I just want to encourage you to think creatively. And there's a lot of stuff on here that you can do, a lot of great ideas. Maybe you hadn't thought of them, but let me just encourage you. All these things are very little things that may not take you long to do at all, but honestly, every one of them could make a profound difference in somebody's life. So again, ssbc.org, and then just go and click the little things button right there, and that will take you to where you can participate in the Little Things Challenge. So pretty simple process.
Yeah. And one thing I'll say with those little things too is, there's a point where we want everybody to take that little thing. I think the next step is also important to highlight too, which we don't necessarily on there, which is as you're doing the little thing, just take that extra step too, and just share the gospel while you're doing it, Yeah. And so go out, because that's what really helps. The gospel is both kind of word and deed. And so going out, doing these little things, and while you're doing it, maybe you're going out and you're eating local, and you just see your waiter or waitress that you haven't seen in a while, and just start a conversation about kind of how you got through this. Start a conversation about the gospel,
Edward makes a great point with your, give a bigger tip, because a lot of your food service people have lost some income. So that's a great tip too. But even when you do that, let them know why you do it. You do it because, because you have been blessed by God. The gift of Jesus has been the best thing in your life, and you're just showing that in all the little ways. I think it's a great point, Darren.
So Brian Cunningham jumped out and said, what are some of the little things you guys have done so far? So Brian, starting with the personal questions, we said make them hard, and he decided to make them all personal. So I'll start. Brian and I kind of wrote Brian into this, but one of the little things that I'm doing is I'm really enjoying being part of the merchants and helping to go set out those chairs and do that stuff. And shout out to kind of Joe Carlucci with that idea, and Matt for being out there every week, Scott Wallers. But and then Lindsay, who's just a neighbor that I met. She was the chairman of the Preservation Society. But there's like a crew of us that just kind of go out there, and that's kind of one of the little things that I'm really enjoying doing, is just going out there, trying to help set up those tables and chairs and impact those businesses. And it's really cool just to get to know the managing staff and stuff like that at those businesses while we're doing it. So that's probably my favorite little thing that I'm doing right now, because it takes like 15 minutes just to set that up and take that down. And but I know that's probably my favorite little thing I'm doing. But I don't know, what's a little thing you're doing that you enjoy?
I think one of a few things that have come across God's drawn my attention to, but one of the things that I'm doing right now really intentionally on a weekly basis and really multiple times during the week is I'm calling some of our members, or just people that we've had contact with over the years at church, and just checking on them, and I don't really have a system for doing it. I just, I make a list, and as people come to mind, I put it on the list, and I just start calling down the list. And it's been really good to just hear people's voice and talk to people. And, sometimes the conversation's short, sometimes it's long, sometimes I hear about a prayer request, sometimes I hear about something awesome that's going on in their life. But it's been, that little investment of time and that phone call has been a real blessing to me too, especially because I've missed people. I miss seeing and engaging with people in person. So it's been fun to just do those phone calls. That's been one little thing. Another little thing, I was coming out of Walmart the other day, and I was with Abby and Jackson. We'd gone up there to pick something up, and we were coming out of the store, and there was a woman who came up and said, "Hey, my car ran out of gas. I don't have any cash. Can you give me a couple dollars for some gas?" And I didn't have any cash with me. So, but I, because we're doing this little things, that's normally an easy excuse, like not to help somebody. But I'm in the back of my mind, I'm like, we just are talking about little things. And so anyway, we were able to help her get her on her way. And it was inconvenient. Like it was, we were kind of in a hurry. I mean, not a big hurry, but we just had to get our things and get out. And but it was a good reminder. It was more for me than for the recipient, because it was just a reminder. Guys, like, okay, are you serious? Are you really going to be serious about responding in little ways to demonstrate the love of Jesus? So yeah, that was one of those things that was sort of a good reminder for me. Hey, don't walk by just because you got a good excuse to walk by, no cash in your pocket and no time on the clock. So
well, as we get going in the Little Things series, so next week we will have a story about David, and then upcoming we have stories about the boy with the fish that he had brought, and I'm trying to think of the other ones. I know we have the widow's mite.
The widow's mite. We're going to talk about her little offering, and then we're also going to talk about we don't ever talk about it, but just we get so caught up in the crucifixion and resurrection that we forget about the borrowed tomb. So just the little act of Joseph giving that tomb is not a little thing. Actually, changed history, helped to change history. So we're going to talk about that too. So those are the little things during this series.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, along with your statement you made about this idea of being open to being inconvenienced, is that for every person we're talking about, there's an inconvenience here in their act of faith. There's an inconvenience in what they're trying to do. And even they're small little acts along the way, but honestly, those little acts take a lot of courage to do. I mean, one of the things you highlighted in the sermon too, that I remember in a small group curriculum we had a little bit ago, was this idea of like picking up a snake by a tail. And if any of you have seen our story or heard the staff talk about my fear of lizards, which Gary, my mom was teaching Caleb how to pick up a lizard and like try and pick him up at their house on Saturday. Good. And I just thought, don't teach my kid this. I don't.
No, that's good. That's good. I'm glad she's doing that. In fact, if I could find it fast enough, I'd share the video right now.
Right now, while we're doing this, that was like 4 years ago too, and it has lived on in staff memory.
Oh, it's my favorite. It's my favorite memory of you.
You're really gonna go look this up right now. I see you scrolling.
I'm trying.
But just knowing that those are, we're talking about little small acts in terms of probably time, or in terms of probably something like that, but for some of these people, they're major things that they're doing. And so they're major acts of faith, whether it's, getting over hurdles, whether it is, it's giving everything they got in terms of the widow and the kid with the fish. There are some things that they're doing that are really pretty big. So it's an understanding too for you guys, if you're in a situation where, it's, should I do this? Should I not? And you can make up excuses. That's normal. And the encouragement here is, don't make the excuse. Press on and press in and just see what happens. And you can come back and tell us it's a complete waste of time after. But we would love to see it.
But the truth is, I don't even know that we fully know. We may think it was a waste of time. I'm convinced that when we get to heaven, there are going to be things that we really didn't know anything about that that we did and maybe didn't even know. And I'm real excited about knowing that that could be a real difference. Okay, so
Casey Preston just found it.
I know. I'm
tagged
getting ready
us in
to
it.
share it. I'm getting ready to share it because
Oh.
Casey helped me out here. So I'm going to share my screen, and this can be our closing, right?
Oh, wait, hold on. We'll close on that. Just
Okay.
a few.
So excited. Thank you, Casey. I couldn't find it fast enough.
Oh, wait, we actually got a serious question here. Hold on, Mark.
Okay.
You talked about listening for God's voice when you run into that burning bush situation, but some of us have never heard his voice. How do you know see, this is why we don't rush to the lizards right here. How do you know, how do you know if it's really a God thing? Sounds like a silly question. I don't think that's silly at all, Mark. But I struggle with that. Look, I think there's a point where both Gary and I'll speak for myself. I constantly question, is it God's voice or not? And Gary and I were just talking about something we're kind of doing on a staff and having a conversation that'll be a teaser for later things. But like for me, I'm right now questioning, like, is God in this? Is this what we're supposed to be doing? Or is this just a cool idea, which is not what I want? I don't just want a cool idea. I want to know if it's God's voice. So Gary, I guess, how do you decipher God's voice in these times to know if it's a burning bush situation or if it's just kind of a burning idea in your head?
Well, I think you exercise listening to it and recognizing the voice. And so the more you exercise being in tune to the Spirit, but whether that's through, in God's word, whether that's in prayer, in community with other believers, I think you begin to tune in, and then, you engage with the Spirit in those day-to-day moments. I think it's interesting that Mark asked this question, because I think Mark, from my perspective, has not only heard God's voice, but responded to it in a recent situation that we shared even at the beginning of the Little Things series with when he's responded. So I think for that question, I think that instance of saying, hey, I feel like I got to do something, there's just something nudging me. That's a good place to start. And I think you test it. Does it line up with Scripture? As I pray about it, do other believers sense it's true? And then I definitely think we all need to be humble about that and sort of testing it to see, is that really God's voice? But I don't know that, when we say hearing God's voice, I think sometimes we think about, hearing Morgan Freeman's voice. And I don't know that that's really it. I think sometimes it's the circumstance and the internal nudge of the Spirit that, quite honestly, can be louder than an audible voice. It's such a pull. It's that moment when I'm standing in that parking lot and I just know, like, if I leave and just say, no, I'm sorry, I don't have any cash and I don't really have a lot of time, I'm going to feel bad about that. The Spirit's already telling me, do not walk by this. And really the Spirit was even already telling me, and this is more about you than it is about her. So don't even start acting like you're Mr. Sacrificial and doing all good, because I'm doing something in you right now by slowing you down. So I think in those moments, you sort of have a weightiness or a heaviness to it. And it's not easy to just walk past it. Now, I will say this, the more you walk past it, the easier it is to walk past. So some of us have walked past it so much that it's going to take time to sort of exercise our listening again to really tune in.
Yeah, and Edward highlighted 1 John 4:1-3, and one section of that I really agree with, and we just did a sermon series on 1 John, but it's every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And that idea that highlighting, hey, if this situation, if you're able to speak about Jesus in this situation, that Jesus is Christ and he then that is from God. And so I completely agree with that. And yes, I want to hear Morgan Freeman's voice all the time in my head. So it scares me, who's going to be the next Morgan Freeman? There has to be one somewhere. Because he's old, man.
It was George Burns before it was Morgan Freeman.
Yeah,
I'm old enough. Mark, are you old enough to remember that George Burns, that it was like he was God? Those movies, Oh God, and there were several of them, and he was the voice of God. So there was one before Morgan. There will be one after Morgan.
Yeah, we'll just see who it is. So for for you guys coming up next week, we will have for Father's Day, we will have our hymn. We didn't do a hymn special last month because they were still finishing this one, and this was done a little bit earlier in this month, but we want to save it for Father's Day. So we have a hymn on Father's Day, and then the next week we'll do another talk back on the next Sunday, the 28th. The week after that is July 5th, so we will have kind of a God and Country thing, and so it'll be a special
So
with
the
hymns.
it's the Hymns of Hope and Encouragement series. There was one in May, and Father's Day, and then 4th of July weekend. So, and our musicians have worked really hard. It's a great program. So next Sunday night we'll premiere it live at 7, and then Sunday the 5th we'll premiere it at 7. So you want to tune in and share that with some of your folks who really love good hymns and good music, good church music. It'll be a lot of fun. So make sure you like it and share it when it comes up.
And so to close all this out, you'll get a picture of Gary and my friendship, which I don't know how to classify this, if this is emotional abuse in the workplace or if this is
My goodness.
good commentary. Look how skinny I am in this though, man. This is like a testament to how fat I've gotten.
Oh, hold on. I gotta get it right now because I want to make sure we.
Aaron is looking for a lizard in his bag.
You're kidding me. It's not in there.
It really is.
This is during a staff meeting. He did this. I walked away from the staff meeting. I forget why. That's why you don't walk out of a staff
I'm
meeting.
trying to give myself some room.
Gosh, it's gonna come running out of him.
Y'all are nuts.
I just thought we could Come on, get the lizard out already.
Oh gosh! I hate you. Get it way back in there.
So he did it again this year
You know
to me, and the thing like jumped on me, and I didn't even see it. So
Yeah, it was such a disappointment this year. We
because
had another.
it was
we had
more
another-
scary this year, but you know.
We had another errant lizard, and this was a big one. And I mean, it was so good. It was in a box. He's going to open it, and it literally jumped right on him, and he didn't even see it. And I was, man.
Did not see. I watched the recording and got freaked out of the recording, but then Megan saved me from that because Gary just walked out and was like, "You deal with it now," and so Megan actually picked it up at Bitter on the way out the door. But I greatly appreciate
You made Megan get it out of your office.
I did not make her. Megan volunteered, and I thanked her for it because it disappeared. We couldn't find it in my office, and
Man.
so.
You got to turn your man card in.
No, I mean, you know, it is what it is. And so Brian always messes with me about this. And I warned him that one day I'm just going to pick up one of the cockroaches that are down in the dungeon. And if you've never seen the dungeon and you're a Southsider, it's a secret place on our church property that's filled with cockroaches. And I'm going to grab one, and sometime I'm going to put it in Brian's office. So, and record it. But I don't know what Gary hates. This is a problem. So
I love everyone and all God's creatures always.
That's not true. I'm sure I can find something that you hate, but I don't think Sherry's gonna rat you out right now. But she's not even on here, but we'll see. Hey guys, thank you for joining us. We will catch you later, and pay attention to the Little Things series, and we'll talk about it a couple more times over the next month. So good luck on the Little Things challenge, and tune in for the hymn special next Sunday night. Thank you guys. Talk to you later.
See you later.